Today we will be looking at 4 terrifying moose attacks and confrontations that were caught on camera. As always, viewer discretion is advised. On the evening of February 16, 2023, Tracy Hansen left her home in Anchorage, Alaska, to walk her dog, Gunner. It was a normal part of their routine. Tracy and Gunner followed the same route 3 times a day, walking beside Old Seward Highway near a row of businesses and car dealerships. Although Anchorage is Alaska's largest city, encounters with moose are common. The animals regularly move between neighborhoods, roads, parking lots, and wooded areas. Most residents learn to give them space. Earlier that evening, Tracy and Gunner had passed a moose along their route. The animal did not immediately react, and Tracy continued walking. She had no reason to believe that the moose would follow her. A short time later, Kate Timmons was traveling along Old Seward Highway with her husband and children when the family noticed something disturbing. A moose was moving quickly along the sidewalk. Directly ahead of it was Tracy. Her back was turned to the animal, and she appeared to have no idea that it was closing in behind her. Kate took out her phone and began recording as the vehicle moved alongside them. At first, the family hoped they could alert Tracy without further agitating the moose. They shouted through the window. Tracy continued walking. The noise from the traffic and surrounding road may have drowned out their voices. She did not turn around, and the distance between her and the moose continued to shrink. The family honked the vehicle's horn and shouted again. There was still no response. The moose was now directly behind Tracy. There was no longer enough distance for her to react, even if she had suddenly realized what was happening. The animal surged forward, lifted itself, and struck her in the back of the head. The force knocked Tracy off her feet and sent her down behind a high bank of snow beside the sidewalk. For a moment, she did not understand what had hit her. Tracy later said that she initially believed a cyclist had struck her from behind. She raised her hands to her head and realized that she was bleeding. Only when she sat up and saw the moose standing nearby did she understand what had happened. The same animal she and Gunner had passed earlier was now in front of her. Kate's family immediately stopped to help. Her husband crossed the snowbank, reached Tracy, and pulled her farther away from the sidewalk. The snowbank was high enough that drivers passing along the road might not have seen her lying behind it. Without the family stopping, she could have remained injured and exposed while the moose was still nearby. They moved Tracy and Gunner into their vehicle while attempting to direct the animal away from them. Gunner had escaped without being injured, but Tracy was bleeding from her head and suffering pain throughout her body. She was taken for medical treatment and required staples to close the wound in her scalp. She also experienced headaches and extensive bruising from the impact. Despite the violence of the attack, she had avoided a fractured skull, serious brain injury, or broken neck. The attack appeared unprovoked to the family that witnessed it. Tracy had not been feeding, touching, or deliberately approaching the animal. However, Gunner's presence may have influenced its behavior. Moose can interpret dogs as a threat because of their resemblance to wolves, one of their natural predators. It is also possible that the moose had already become stressed when Tracy and Gunner passed it earlier. Whatever caused the charge, Tracy never saw it coming. That was what made this attack so dangerous. She had no opportunity to examine the moose's posture, see its ears move backward, or notice any other warning signs. By the time the family inside the vehicle realized what was about to happen, the animal was already committed. Only days later, Tracy and Gunner returned to the same route. She still had staples in her head, bruises across her body, and persistent headaches, but she refused to allow the encounter to end their daily walks. She had survived because the moose struck once and continued forward rather than remaining over her and stomping repeatedly. She had also survived because a family happened to be driving beside her at exactly the right moment. On the morning of September 24, 2024, Caleb Lewis entered a swampy section of forest in northern Maine. Caleb operated Allagash Antlers, a business that searched the wilderness for antlers naturally shed by moose and deer. The antlers were collected and cut into dog chews. He was familiar with the region and had spent years around moose. He had also worked as a ranger on the Allagash Wilderness Waterway for 5 years. That morning, he was setting up game cameras in preparation for deer season. At approximately 8 o'clock, Caleb heard the call of a cow moose somewhere nearby. He soon realized she was not alone. 3 bull moose were in the area, all competing for the cow's attention. It was the autumn rut, the moose mating season. During this period, bulls experience a dramatic rise in testosterone. They become more focused on females, more willing to challenge rivals, and less likely to retreat from something they perceive as competition. One of the bulls heard Caleb moving through the swamp and began approaching him. Caleb took out his phone and started recording. The bull did not charge immediately. It walked toward him slowly, staring directly at him as it moved through the trees. Caleb remained where he was. Under ordinary circumstances, a wild moose will often move away once it recognizes a human voice. Caleb had experienced encounters in which simply speaking was enough to make the animal retreat. He expected the same thing to happen now, but the bull continued forward. It crossed the final section of brush until it was standing approximately 3 feet away. At that distance, Caleb had almost no room to escape. The animal's body filled the space in front of him, and its antlers extended outward on both sides of its head. Caleb firmly told the moose that it was close enough. The bull did not retreat.
Close enough, buddy. It's close enough.
Caleb spoke again, hoping the sound of his voice would make the animal recognize that he was a person rather than another bull. Instead, the moose shifted its head and prepared to attack. Caleb shouted, "No!" But the animal had already committed. The bull lunged. With no time to reach a large tree or move out of its path, Caleb turned his back and extended his left hand behind him, trying to prevent one of the antlers from catching his body. The moose struck him and knocked him violently to the ground. Caleb slid approximately 6 feet from the force of the impact. The camera continued capturing the chaos as he yelled repeatedly from the ground. His shouting appeared to interrupt the attack. Instead of following him and striking again, the bull stopped. It turned and moved away through the forest. Caleb remained on his hands and knees, attempting to determine whether he had been seriously injured. He had been hit by an animal weighing close to half a ton while standing only a few feet away. The antlers could have punctured his torso, caught his neck, or prevented him from being thrown clear. Instead, Caleb escaped with bruises and painful blows to his legs, arms, and back. Once the moose had moved away, he slowly made his way out of the swamp. Caleb later explained that he had encountered cows with calves during spring and bulls during mating season before, but this was the first time one of the bulls had directly attacked anyone working with Allagash antlers. He was also grateful that his dogs were not with him. Dogs can intensify a moose encounter almost instantly. A moose may focus on the dog, but the animal often runs back toward its owner for protection, bringing the charging moose directly with it. In Caleb's case, the trigger was more likely the rut. The cows' calls had attracted several bulls into the same area. They were already competing with one another, and the approaching bull may have interpreted the sound and movement Caleb made in the forest as another challenge. The most unsettling part of the recording is how little fear the bull showed. It did not panic when it heard a human voice. It did not turn when Caleb spoke firmly. It moved closer until almost no space remained between them. Caleb knew the animal was dangerous. He understood moose behavior and had years of experience in the wilderness, but familiarity had taught him that most moose moved away. This one did not. The normal reaction Caleb had expected from the animal had been overwhelmed by the breeding season. By the time he understood that his voice would not stop it, the antlers were already moving toward him. On November 30th, 2021, visitors at Zhyrytkul National Park in Russia's Chelyabinsk region gathered around a young moose. The animal appeared comfortable around people. Instead of retreating into the forest, it approached the group and searched for food. Several adults and children moved closer, offering it something to eat, attempting to stroke its body, and raising their phones for photographs. To the people surrounding it, the moose did not appear aggressive. It was young, curious, and willing to accept food from human hands. Each calm second encouraged the tourists to move a little closer. The group gradually formed a loose circle around the animal. People stood near its head and shoulders while children reached toward its body. The moose continued eating. One woman held out food and the animal took it from her. While it chewed, other visitors attempted to touch it. The distance that should have existed between a wild animal and the crowd disappeared completely. A young girl stood directly in front of the moose. She reached toward it as it was eating. Without warning, the animal lifted its front legs and struck her. The girl was knocked to the ground. A woman immediately bent over the child to protect and lift her, placing herself directly beneath the moose's front legs. The animal struck again, knocking the woman down as well. People began shouting and moving toward it, trying to drive it away from the girl. For several chaotic moments, the moose remained close enough to deliver another blow. The crowd finally forced it back and pulled the child away. The girl was later reported to be all right, despite being struck and knocked down. The woman also escaped what could have been much more serious injuries. The attack had happened in only a few seconds, but the buildup had been much longer. The tourists had surrounded the moose, offered it food, touched it while it was eating, and placed a child directly in front of its body. Park representatives said the visitors had provoked the animal by approaching too closely and crowding around it. The moose had initially behaved calmly because it expected food, but feeding wild animals can make their behavior more dangerous rather than less. An animal that learns to associate people with food begins approaching them deliberately. It may search their hands and clothing, push into groups, or become frustrated when the food stops. The visitors may then mistake that conditioned behavior for friendliness. But the animal has not become domesticated. It remains large, powerful, and capable of reacting instinctively when it feels surrounded, touched, or denied what it expects. Unlike a predator, the moose did not need to bite the girl or hold her down. A single movement of its front legs was enough to send her to the ground. The woman's instinct was to lean over the child. That protected the girl but placed the woman in the exact position from which a moose can do the most damage. This incident was entirely preventable. The moose did not chase the group through the forest. It did not enter a home or surprise someone on an isolated trail. The crowd created the encounter. They eliminated the animal's personal space because it appeared tolerant. They treated its willingness to accept food as permission to keep approaching. Then when its behavior changed, there was no safe distance left. In May 2018, a cow moose and her 2 young calves moved onto a bike trail beside the Glen Highway in Anchorage, Alaska. The family attracted attention because it had settled close to a route regularly used by cyclists. A local television crew arrived to report on the moose and warn people about the danger of approaching a mother with newborn calves. While the crew was filming, 78-year-old cyclist Andrew Ecker came along the trail. Andrew was familiar with the route and had ridden there many times, but on this occasion a section of the path ahead of him was occupied by one of the most defensive animals in Alaska. A cow moose with newborn calves does not need to believe that a person intends to hurt them. She only needs to believe that the person is too close. Andrew continued along the trail until the mother reacted. She moved toward him and lunged. Andrew fell from his bicycle into the grass. The exact moment was so fast that he later said his memory of the fall was unclear. He could not say with certainty whether the moose had physically struck him or whether he had fallen while trying to avoid her. What mattered was that he was now on the ground, separated from his bicycle, while the cow remained close. The danger had not ended with the first charge. The television crew had been preparing to leave when another cyclist alerted them that the moose was still confronting a rider. Reporter Joe Vigil and cameraman Jerez Musarek realized that Andrew could not safely move away. The cow approached him again. At first, the crew hesitated to move Andrew because they did not know whether he had suffered a spinal or head injury in the fall. But leaving him on the ground beside the moose carried its own risk. They drove the station vehicle off the road, down the embankment and onto the trail, positioning it between Andrew and the animal. The vehicle became a moving barrier. The moose followed and lunged toward it as the crew attempted to shield Andrew. Once they were close enough, they checked whether he could move. Andrew appeared disoriented, but he was able to get up. The crew brought him into the back seat of their vehicle and moved him away from the cow and her calves. Andrew later said he had not suffered a concussion, although he had been advised to stay off his bicycle for several days. No one was seriously hurt, and the moose family was not harmed. The Alaska Department of Fish and Game later closed that section of the trail with cones and tape to prevent more cyclists from entering the area. Andrew's encounter showed how an ordinary route could become dangerous without warning. The trail had not changed. The cyclist was doing something he had done many times before, but a mother had brought her calves onto a narrow path, and anyone who continued forward risked being interpreted as a threat. Turning around would have been the safest option, but cyclists can close distance quickly. By the time someone sees the calves and recognizes the danger, the mother may already be reacting. The news crew's presence was an extraordinary piece of luck. They had a vehicle close enough to act as a barrier, and they were willing to place it between Andrew and the moose. Without that intervention, he might have remained trapped on the ground while the cow returned for another charge.